everyone. Thanks for joining us here on France 24. U.S. President Joe Biden says he is willing to talk to Vladimir Putin, but only if he shows a willingness to end the war in Ukraine. That was one of the many headlines to come out of the state visit to Washington by French President Emmanuel Macron, who has long championed dialogue with Putin. Well, the war in Ukraine was one of the many areas where the U.S. and France appear to be on the same page, and Macron's visit culminated with a lavish state dinner at the White House on Thursday night. Here's President Biden speaking about the relationship between the two countries.
Tonight, we celebrate the enduring alliance between France and the United States, a partnership that's marked by so many firsts. France was our first ally, first country to fly the American flag after our revolution. And Frank hosted the first diplomatic post. Before, more than anything else, France has been our first friend.
And for more on this, we're joined by Caroline Fredrickson. She's a senior fellow at the Brennan Center for Justice. Thanks so much for being with us here on France 24. As you saw, there was a huge show of friendship between Joe Biden and Emmanuel Macron during the visit, some even referring to it as le bromance. In the end, was there any great result, though? Did anything significant come out of this visit?
Well, I think it is important to reestablish that deep friendship, one that I'm very partial to, being a Franco-American myself. The reestablishment of the warm friendship between the United States and France that was eroded under the Trump administration, it has been firmly reinvigorated under President Biden with President Macron. And so I think that is important. It goes beyond symbolism because it enables the two countries to really work more closely together. And there are some issues. Certainly, I think they tried to reconcile positions around Ukraine, where President Macron has been pushing harder for current negotiations, and President Biden has been wanting to support Zelensky more clearly in resisting. And they both agreed that they would kind of work forward, but with negotiations, but also on the condition of greater battlefield successes, which would give greater leverage. I think some of the economic issues were also advanced. There hasn't been anything extremely concrete, but I think this is how diplomacy works. Important statements work to come afterwards.
You mentioned economic issues. Macron did have some tough words on trade, criticizing the Biden administration's Inflation Reduction Act, saying that it put American companies at an advantage over European ones. Why does that have the French president so concerned?
Well, it was a lot of money. And President Biden is rightly trying to ensure that the United States has a domestic industry on renewable energies, solar power, and so forth, as well as other critical industries. And I think France and Europe generally are concerned that that's going to put their companies at a big disadvantage when it comes to the American market, which is obviously enormous. So I think there are values on both sides. There are important interests on both sides. And so I think that one is going to take a little while to negotiate. But again, both sides indicated a respect for each other's position. And as President Biden said, there were some mistakes and there were some problems with the Inflation Reduction Act, indicating that he's ready to send his advisors to sit down and work out some compromise with the Europeans.
Yeah, I think he said there could be some tweaks made to that. Well, so during the visit, Biden said he would be willing to talk to Vladimir Putin, which is something Emmanuel Macron has done many times before. Does this signal that Macron has been able to influence Biden's thinking on that?
Well, yes and no. I think, again, it was somewhat conditional, from my understanding, on Ukraine's being having continued success in its battlefield efforts against Russia. Which would make the negotiations quite different from doing it from a position of more weakness. So I think there is some agreement that this is not something that would happen immediately. It wasn't possible immediately. And so again, I think they worked really hard to find a middle ground where both sides could come out saying that they had gotten some level of movement from the other. Very friendly negotiations between the two countries, and I think an effort to work through these differing positions and to come out in a place where we can see some ability to work together in the future.
Another issue on the table, how did U.S.-China relations figure into these talks between Biden and Macron?
Well, I think there is a united interest in strengthening our economies and ensuring that the Chinese don't dominate the world economy in terms of the supply chain and access to critical minerals and industrial products. And that is a joint interest that we have to work very hard to resolve. And I think that's also behind the Inflation Reduction Act discussions, right? Because how those industries are supported in the United States or excluded, or we exclude the Europeans and affect their ability to address these shortages, I think is going to have implications for all of our relationships with China. So I think that's a key part of we have a very shared interest there, and that's going to help, I hope, resolve some of the other areas of disagreement, or at least of concern.
Okay, we want to thank you, Caroline Fredrickson, Senior Fellow at the Brennan Center for Justice, for joining us here on France 24.